the I that appears. So how does it appear to us? What is that I when we think I? Like what is like it is well in actuality the I when we talk of the I is the one that thinks I, that thought, the object of that thought. So when we think I go, I see, I do this, someone looks at me or looks at the I. So in that sense, there's always that sense of an I, and that is the one that we're talking about here. So Geshe said previously he thought it was very difficult to identify the I. It was just like looking at a vase or something. The sense that it was very difficult to identify how the I appears. But it is just that. It is just that. It's just that the I we're trying to identify here is the I of the object of the thought I. So this is also what Keto Rinpoche says in his investigation, in his commentary, investigating the view, when he says, I, the mind that thinks I, that is the I that goes, that is the I, the best of things.
And Dinashin Ketuji Tontin on the Disonsha, Narzin Tengi, Pumbungaka Ham, number Sheba, Tadu Zimber Mawani, and Tigma Resirwa, Narzin Tengi, Pumbangata, Naka, Yana, Namshi, Tadu Zimama, Tigma Re, and Kumzenka Resena, and Chibane Kibiber, Sulaya. Ngai sem so nyamdu zimbi lo rangchong su ge xings ngai sem se lo de ge ba ma do lu di ngao sem de ngao ni bi lo rangi ngangi den chi kyang mi ge wa nyong tu bi shirs se sa ngai sem samba ma do lu di ngao sem de ngao ni bi lo ki me ba de ma su nyong tu ku dos ba de ji song do.
So likewise, Ketuji says in his text the great harmony of the empty. So in this text, Ketuji talks about it is not correct when we have a view, an innate sense of self. The innate self-grasping awareness does not perceive of the aggregates as being the self, as like the consciousness being the self and so forth. It does not actually perceive as one of the aggregates as being the self. Why? Because naturally there's a sense, since we were little, there's a sense, my body, my mind. So therefore it seems they're separate. There's not such a sense that they're the same, but rather that there's an owner, there's something that owns them, that holds them, that possesses those parts. So this is why it's not that the aggregates are perceived as itself.
Sablong umitati se cherumchi sum sablong umitati se dinolola ani karison resena ani nordin hengi yilola phumbi nawa michar shingsro ani kebar ngao nyam biloda dunyam duyam michars nordin hengi la phumbu macharwa mase ani ngao nyam biloda dunyam du phumbi nawa chagma res. Ani disungje alengel tilana.
So likewise, in the Lama Tsongkhapa's volumes, in the volumes. So there's a text in the volume Tsapa. This is like usually alphabetic letters, not alphabetic, Tibetan letters. They enumerate in volumes. So the volume Tsapa is a volume in which you find a text by Lama Tsongkhapa, which is guiding a person to the profound view of the middle. So this guiding someone, the guidance guidance to the profound view of the middle. So in this text, it talks about the fact that not only does the awareness, the innate awareness that perceives a self, not only does it not appear to that mind that the aggregates are the self, but also there's no sense, there's no appearance of the aggregates at the same time as there's the mind thinking I. So there's no, at the same time as that mind is thinking I, there is no appearance of any of the aggregates.
ona phungbe nawa khola charwa tawashi wongi dupa nyamnas wa la de phungbe nawa chargi yeba tawachi ngozu sorgu duas di cheba ina de khui ngalo su chuma yingi khola nawa ma yinos chisa ngani bilo cheba la ngela phungbu charwa res chisa ngela phungbu chargu yeba yinsa digi ina chukche ngawnya bilo kharang la phungbu chargi du tembi ta simchu di yongu yo res wa tini sumda.
So therefore, really, the part you really need is now the following quotation, the following passage here. So then, if what is it about? Someone asks now, what is it about the appearance of the aggregates? There's a feeling that the aggregates do appear when we think I. And the response here, Lama Tsongkhapa gives is that the aggregates appear before there's the thought I. So before the thought I arises, the aggregates have to appear. So it just precedes, the appearance of the aggregates precedes the mind that thinks I. And we get confused about this fact and have a sense that, therefore, when we think I, when the thought I arises, also there is an appearance of the aggregates. But that's actually not the case.
And Dina Shinpeje Shindatini Nolole Pegi Awani Bilukeva Niela, the Pumbuchargores, the Kakashi Hondido, Chigi Tanzini Kasadanzi Musuki Jumzena, and then Chidan Yushu Chidan Yushu Nalola Pumulation with Tamasumi Jumzena, there's a son of the Muela and Pumuma Sumba Chini, and Awani Bilukima is at the son.
And so likewise, some in context it says that, or there's also the exception, so this is said in some texts, and this is the acceptance of also some masters. In the text it basically says, before there's the thought of I, the aggregates, the thought of I goes before that. And this is why some people say that necessarily, therefore, whenever there's a thought of I, the perception of the aggregates has to take place. Which also explains why some people say that apprehension or grasping at phenomena other than the self has to precede the grasping at a person. And so also this is also why it's explained why there's no phenomenon as existing as separate from the aggregate is explained, but a person as existing as separate from the person. Only that is explained. So this goes back to the fact that there's a sense there always need to be the aggregates perceived before one can actually have the thought I.
Da tinti ina da tiwaji legiro wa ngwe songwa la nye le phumbo ngwe songwa re di ko na phumbo ngwe songwa la ngwe le ya phumbo kharang ta shi ngwe songwa re na di songwa la ya di ge ta shi ji yore di ngwe songwa re la na ani thume cha che ni di ma le me.
So if that is the case, that whenever there's the thought I, whenever the thought I arises, that consciousness needs to be preceded by the perception of the aggregates, well then, those aggregates, before the thought, these aggregates, or before the mind that perceives those aggregates arises, then another mind that perceives the basis of the interpretation of those aggregates has to arise before the actual mind can arise. And if the basis of these aggregates are perceived, then their basis of aggregates has to also be preceded before that. So we end up with an infinite regress. I will not answer. I will not be able to answer, and we don't need to look for an answer.
Tu si di aletanda kazanti kashichi tiwaji sare. Ani tani chiju sum siyadi. Ani sum nalo ne tani bisheba la taba siyadi. Ani tenda kar res. Ani chiju sum nan ta tani bisheba la taba shabo ya kar res. Tiwa dirwa odinde tiwaji do.
So Geshe-la is saying that some people express the question, have asked the question with regard to the three characteristics of something being conventionally existent. So therefore, well, here in this case, you need these three characteristics, and in particular, the question that has arisen here is with regard to the necessity of the first characteristic. Why something has to be renowned to a conventional consciousness? What does that refer to? Why does that have to be? Why is that characteristic part of those three characteristics for something existing conventionally?
아니 대권은이나 마다마 집이시바 또 그런기 진단 로칸다 가이나 로디기 진단기 유디기 대권은이 지어라 디라 마다마 집 아까생이만 뭐 시바나시 안 주딩이 시바디 타니 시바지 안 디라 잡아세디 딘디 시바디라 나와다 아니 요마 마시디 나니치모기 디코도디라 요레 이때 다나 탄키 주숨데디 다가서 하고 요라 어디와라 마티시디 찾아 요레.
So here the translation is wrong. It should be, it is renowned to a consciousness of convention. It's not a conventional consciousness. It is renowned to a consciousness of convention. So anyhow, here when we talk about a consciousness of convention, a consciousness of convention refers to a consciousness that does not engage in analysis or investigation with regard to suchness. So that kind of consciousness that does not analyze or that does not investigate suchness, to such a consciousness of convention, a phenomenon merely appears. It is merely experienced by suchness. So this is something I've explained before. This explanation can also be found in the Lamrim Chemo on page 178. English
다 타니비 시바도 잡아서 기주디나나 주고해디 되게 신단 인디라이나 차마잡기제요래 근데들 차마잡기제 아예팅 다 디지디잖아 아니 토요일에 밀다바다 미원녀바다 민고에 미원녀바니디 아니 러문에 둘랑에도 저기 유술디 토요일에 제나 미니에면도 안 미유세들 제나 미니에요 미기 남시디 미인세야라고도 미 풍부 저거도 미인세야라고 디 유문의 여인자 디라 타니비 정신이 뇌만의 계절이 시모공에도 그런 한문에 다 쳐들어 다 유문의 매라나 이거로 미원녀 버치거래 제가 주는 매버 지거래 이내 지미만 히다바 가르래세 뒤어디 신내데디 딜라 아니 타니비 정신이 뇌그도나 아니 미마레 타니비 정신이 뇌민도나 아니 미레스라 디 계절이 두스레와 인자 engye 담고들 타니비 시바를 타고 하스 아니 잡이 된데다 아니 정신이 뇌보면 봐서는 신앙이 두스레면도 됩니다.
So here, with regard to why this is part of this description or part of the criterion for something being conventionally existent, so being renowned to a consciousness of convention, or such non-investigated kind of awareness here. So I don't think, I don't think it is like, from the point of view, if this was removed, it would become incorrect. In other words, that you could leave it out and the other two, just the remaining two still being there, it would still be correct to have to describe it that way, to say that these are the two characteristics of something being conventional. These are part of the criteria. These are the other, just having those two criteria for something being conventionally existent. So with regard to, for example, if phenomena were to exist from their own side, if they were to exist intrinsically or inherently, then when we take the heap of stones, well, that is not truly a person, even though it appears that way, that is not truly a person. From the point of view of the actual body of the person, well, that is an actual person. So an actual person can be found in one case, and it cannot be found in the other case. That would be the case if phenomena were to exist from their own side. Now, phenomena do not exist from their own side, and nonetheless, we do say that the heap of stones are not a person, whereas the person's body, that we can call, with regard to that, we can refer to a person. So what is the difference here? So the difference here is that we say conventionally, one is is an actual person and one is not. And it is therefore contradicted. It is contradicted by, so if it existed intrinsically, if the person were intrinsically a person and the heaps of stone were intrinsically a person, if we were to accept that, that is contradicted by the ultimate valid cognizer. Now, the conventional valid cognizer contradicts the fact that when we say the heaps of stones are the person. So that is contradicted by the conventional valid cognizer. But just in terms of conventional existence, it appears to us, to a mind of convention, the person appears to be a person. So just to kind of stress that fact, that's why Geshe-la says he thinks this is mentioned here. That just it's appearing to a mind, it is experienced by a mind that it does not investigate.
다 신단이 들라 참마접지에 요라 타니 비시바다 타 타니 주지기 체메 마네나양 아니 요보에 요말 데버트바다 야 타니 비시바다 타 데너 주지기 체메 마네나양 요보에 요말 다 갈라버다 자타발라버다 자타발다 두서 타니 어디래.
So with regard to the latter two, if the latter two were missing, so if we don't say that something, in order for it to be conventionally existent, it has to be, in order for something that exists conventionally, it cannot be contradicted by conventional valid cognizer. Or if we say, in order for something to be conventionally existent, it cannot be contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer. So those two are necessary, because if one of those is missing, then what would follow would be that, for example, inherent existence would be existent. It would be existent because it would exist conventionally. It would exist conventionally because the last characteristic is not fulfilled. But inherent existence is contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer, so therefore being contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer is necessary as one of the criteria for conventional existence. Likewise, we talk about permanent sound. Permanent sound does not exist, but permanent sound is not contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer, but it's contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. So therefore, if that was missing, if the conventional valid cognizer were not there, it would absurdly follow that permanent sound would be existent, it would be conventionally existent. Do we have any other opinion here? Is there anyone here who has another view on why this is added, being renowned to a consciousness of convention? Why this is added as one of the criteria for conventional existence? Anyone?
Mombarasanalaya.
This time.
Mombarasanalaya again. Mombarasanalaya. And Duji Pumbola and the duo on Yabatita, Tatala duo on Yabatini, and Yamete, Tani Neba Jago Mogoseti. Tani Neba Jago Mogoseti, Tani Chiji something on the Tani Tambo, Tani Bishibara Traba in the Chibai. Tinti Shabin.
Sure. Something here. Tani Bishibara Shabin,
Tina Castle, Tani Shepala Castle, Tina, Tani Neba Jago said, and they didn't shout.
Genla, he spoke, he kind of asked Geshe-la, well, does that mean in the elimination of the thought, you find this passage, this is because these two, so talking about the rope and talking about the snake, so in this case of like a rope snake and an actual snake, so on the basis of the rope, you perceive something to be a snake, or on the basis of the snake body, you perceive something as being a snake. So there's this difference. So here, this difference is expressed by in this phrase, expressed by this passage in the Illumination of the Thought by Lama Tsongkhapa, where it says, "This is because these two differ in many ways, such as with regard to whether their verbal conventions must be used or not." So, with regard to this phrase here, his question would be, does that actually refer to here being like a convention being used or not, using a verbal convention or not in one case with regard to the actual snake, and not using the verbal convention with regard to the rope? Does that maybe mean here renounce to a consciousness of conventions? And Geshe was saying, you're supposed to give your opinion, not ask a question.
and tabola juice ni tani chebo ke yo ma res ta dusung de so ro sto di ji di tani chemo we ka res na tabola tabas ni mingi yu ga cha de ro ta gisi ane tabola tabas ye mingi me ba ina an tinji lu ba di na lo la an tabola ju la sha na ya kazan ke je de ta ani di won de chebe ta ju cha ro ta cheza kaza di 되게 캠베 가리타나 디제토레스 계제디 디던데스 저메로 삼스타 모고모르스 치디다 타닝이 붙잡고 있는 게 당시에
So actually this is like similar to this passage here is similar to the Lamrim what it says there, also that with regard to having to whether the verbal convention must be used or not, whether the verbal convention must be used or not. So this is very similar here, except that the sequence is slightly different in the Lamrim. But anyhow, so here the question is, does one have to use the verbal convention snake in the case of imputing snake on a snake's body, but does not use it in the case of a rope? One does not use the verbal convention snake when one wrongly imputes snake on the rope. So that is kind of the question here. So, but let's assume. So here, well, the reason is actually because a rope has its own name. So a rope has its own verbal convention, which is the verbal convention rope. So we don't need to use the snake. We don't need to use the verbal convention snake because the rope has already its own name, its own verbal convention. But then Geshe was saying, well, how about you went to a place where there was no name for a rope? So there was no word for rope, and we were to decide to call it snake. So then the rope would actually become a snake. So we use that word snake for that rope. So this was a discussion we had also previously with regard to using names, like there's a person who coins a term. So it depends on that person coining a term. The person coins a term, and that becomes widely known, and then that is the verbal convention that is accepted to, that becomes the verbal convention that is accepted. 这种概念呢，应该跟这里我们讲到虚否决定名言里面直花神为蛇这个概念应该是有点关系。
我먼저 공부를 아니 구쇼치기 미드즈 민도다는 비우스 민다샤 디우스. 제선다 디 용다차는 공부는 용다차 인정 안 타버도 신건는 디 모두 당에 신감에 자리 떨어져. 다 비우기 따라 키는 친소나 비우 따라 당에 이나 항상 거마. 오늘 저는 항시 상고로 비우기 그래서 따라 그렇게 키는 떨어져도 항시 상고로. 그래서 다 딘디기 내다고 와라 당이체 가자라고는 신 당이체 마신 내 많이 시디 다 당이 디원도지 비우인다나 이렇게 돼. 그러다 내 말에 당이 다 그런 고배는 로그다 당이 콜 비우신 잡인자 당이 디원도지니 비우레스 아니 부유적이다 능진 용다기 지용기 부배 지용기다 부유적 신화길 등에들 비우래 당이 디원도지는 비우마레스 랑금외네 아니 비우인 마인기 여와 민두스라마이나 딜레 lunda지베기 큐엔트레
뭐라다는 비우 So in his in Geshe-la monastery, there was a monk who called the driver monkey. So he started calling him the driver monkey. So whenever he saw the driver, then he said, "Oh, there's a monkey driving the car," and it slowly became known. It became used widely. The driver from now on was called monkey. So it was not like you saw him driving in a truck from afar and going, "Oh look, there's the monkey." I mean, now when you think about it, it's pretty amazing to actually call this person monkey. But since this term had been coined, since it's been widely known and had been was used so widely, there was no sense of amazement that this person was called monkey, because that was really the name that was used in those circumstances or in that place or at that time. So therefore we can say, is that driver really a monkey? Well, from the point of view of using the verbal convention in such a way, we can say yes, the driver is a monkey. But from the point of view of using the verbal convention for a living being that lives in a forest, that has a furry body, that behaves like a monkey basically. So from the point of view of that, then we would say that this driver is not a monkey. So it's independent on or in relation to a certain situation, a certain way of using the word, that we can say that this person is a monkey or is not a monkey. But from its own side, it is neither. So from its own side, we do not describe this person as being a monkey or etc. From its own side, it's not a monkey or not a monkey.
So if there's
a logical fault, if there's no logical fault in that, then we can kind of put the two together, this assertion from the elimination of the thought, and what has been explained just now. If there's a fault, well then that's
Tani the Tratsane and Bates Trasas. Tomar and the Dajavati Senatella, Nebat and the Tani Chamago, Gossetti, Nashan Kalichim, Bates. Tomar and the Doja Tombas, Tomar and the Dajavati Senatella, and Thomas Tani Jagores and Jago Mogossetti Della. She's a Tani Trasan, the Telepombashi Tani Trasane, and it's just that this is Tomar Dajavati Senat, Telatani, what Jago Mogossetti, Nashan Kalichim,
yes. Tamata thank you watching Telepombasi Laboris,
So the other Genla is saying that, well, actually, when it's already been established that a round belly flat-based phenomenon able to become the function of holding water is a vase, and that has already been established, well, that's all right then. But how about it's newly called such? When you newly call it a vase, so at that time, is that really kind of like, its name is now renowned as such, is that really now the word that you use, the verbal convention? So is it really like a sense that's what it is? So about the elimination to the thought says it's not talking about initially using a verbal convention. So initially, this is not said in here. So basically, here, maybe I wasn't clear before, but basically the question was, do you have to use this verbal convention when you initially, so this difference here, whether the verbal convention has to be used or not, does that have to be used also when the new application of a term takes place? And Geshe-la said this is not from the point of view of newly applying a convention. This kind of elimination. And then next, Geshe-la talked about, well, from the point of view, let's take the example of a vessel with liquid. When a human being looks at it, it sees, a human being sees water, the preta being sees pus and blood, and the vessel being sees nectar. So here in this case, we're not saying that from the perspective of a human being, it is water. From the perspective of the preta, it is pus and blood, etc. It's not that sense of relativity. Why? Because we're saying that all three exist. So there is a part of this liquid that is water, there is a part of this liquid that is pus and blood, and there's a part of this liquid that is actual nectar or ambrosia. So therefore there are valid cognitions for each of these objects. It's not from the perspective of a certain being. So this is different. This case here is different to the earlier case. Whenever a new name arrives in the monastery, it becomes customary to give a kind of name, like a nasty nickname to that. So here in this case, we're like a new monk in the monastery, a nasty nickname. So there was one case of a monk, he was supposed to be newly ordained, and so he was supposed to be newly ordained, and his mother knew about the situation that these nasty nicknames were given. So thus the mother therefore went to the teacher, or the person who was supposed to become the teacher of this monk, and she said, I know you give these nasty nicknames. Please don't give this nasty nickname to my son. So she made an offering of an envelope, and actually this boy apparently he used to be bold when he was younger, and so the response was like, well, that he looks like a brass ladle. It may be that this name will be given to him, that he looks like a brass ladle, right? And so therefore from now on he was called a brass ladle.
디지털 균도 제대 총재 이나다 달리물리가 제 이나다 가르치기 위해 수수수 다 다른 게 되게 되어 있어요. 되어지려 하다. 다 되게 되어 파게야 데스 신유 데스 유행이 지다 로제 친구 신비 통의 상담만도 신다 이엔 균이 마통나 안티기도 내마도 기재게요 말아. 자 되게 되면도 시디 다 된다다 단 남배기 다 최신 민다샤 요데 제거를 고마데 세 되버지 리거라 단 남시 균도 제대에 다가는 게 되기에나 최신 민다샤 유수부지 제거해 균요 말아 다 디고 민도나 아니 신이 신다지 세다 최지구 남배 최신 민다샤 요데 제고도 민도스 센티오직 들리기로 하다니라 신주 당부 당부.
So now this suffices with regard to this kind of investigation here. So Geshe-la basically asked, there was another question that came from a man from Ando, but he's not here today. So Geshe-la is basically saying it's not necessary to answer this question today. But anyway, with regard to the way of meditating on emptiness, here the way of the explanation here that Geshe-la gives is one of the chapters in this book on how a beginner should meditate on emptiness. So Geshe-la will kind of talk about this in a more general kind of sense, but before talking about it in a more general sense, to give you the following kind of explanation. When we talk about Dharma, so when we speak about whether something is Dharma or not, so Dharma practice, we speak about Dharma practice from the point of view of being happy, achieving happiness. And so here, whatever we do it for the sake of happiness, and so we engage in business, we work in an office, etc. So in order to get happiness or not. So the question is, does this really make us happy? Is this actually enough or not? Is this sufficient to do these kind of things in order to attain happiness? And this is a kind of question that an educated person who's got a vast mind, they can ask this kind of, they would ask such a kind of question. Otherwise, someone who's just satisfied and kind of narrow-minded with their day-to-day kind of activity, that kind of person would not ask that kind of question. So here, therefore, we need to see, do we need to do the Dharma or not? Is it necessary? Is it necessary? Is there a purpose for engaging in Dharma practice or not?
다 최고 원도제는 낭취기 제시와이나 낭취지기 이제 다 담담한 것도 수수수다 가지 카니칼라나 만나는 조슈교대 세죠라 조슈제대디 그시기 아니 차체 면제사 이게 된 다가랑 라슈제대시도 다가랑 디거르베스 제베제시로다 다 지단 팬도 매나다 제요 말아 팬도 유에발레 다가랑다 슈geb서 조디 and 디르베스 디르베스리로다
So with regard to now, when we say engaging in Dharma, well, there's different types of Dharma, but here we're talking about the Buddha Dharma. So, and there's different ways of practicing the Buddha Dharma, practicing Buddhism itself. And so, what is the main kind of practice that we focus on? Now, independent of what we actually claim to be our main practice, but what we actually engage in as being our main practice. Whether that's, for example, offering mandala, making mandala offerings, doing prostrations, reciting the 100-syllable mantra of Bodhisattva, and so forth. Now, if it is not beneficial, of course, then there's no need to talk about it, but if it is beneficial, is this actual Dharma?
디나시 왕시 컨텐츠 왜냐면 다 가야 rum어지 생활들은 수하다 다가랑 가는 미팅이 용되거라 다 뒤에 뒤거를 된대랑 레베티 뒤기도에스
So like receiving initiations, doing prayers, reciting mantras, engaging in requests, requesting meditation deities, kind of worshipping or requesting meditation deities. So is that sufficient for Dharma practice?
디 양티 디바탄 디잖아 크게 디지기도 디지기도에 크게 디지기도 디지기디 말다 나랑 가르치고 이 디체는 디기도 있어 이래마다
This question is not about what they are doing, what those people are practicing, is that okay? For those people over there, what they're practicing, is that okay or not? No, we should look at our own self and see that, and check whether the Dharma practice we engage in is actually okay, is actually appropriate.
디나신다 파기 우라 미비 테마니샤 코메레 다 류라 미비 테마니샤 코메레 다 딘디기 테마니샤 이리 딘디 콤데 되는 용것도 다랑 샌드위치딩 다랑 디체소 디디레 디거바
So likewise, those who practice mindfulness, who only practice mindfulness, so mindfulness of the breathing, mindfulness of the body, so only practicing mindfulness, is that sufficient? Is that appropriate? As is that in Dharma?
然后去安静去修念住，那把所有的重点放在这个上面，这样去修是可以的吗？
那第呢，先把个搞是我的心内到出来特别节节，那第这做点节定的，那第呢先到外去到咱们心里把个搞了来，到这种体力做成去到人们认识明大节，到弄堂第这个人们做第怎么做点节定的，我就是这个了。
So likewise, the practice of association of the deity, so like generation state practices, or the practices of engaging in what practices to do with the subtle winds, the subtle energy winds in the body, the drops, and so forth. Again, is that done? Is that real? Is that done?
所有的精力全部都放在这个上面，这样修是可以的吗？
但第这个当国也可是是呢，别的我这位呢，我那真的胸腔有。 而且呀，他就对老开始是带有，带有了的，因为那么原因的，年年前的提高当的新旧嘛，前呢，那么些军都出来的，因为可有了可以这个都带的，的属因素太多了，的他蒙的就当然是吧的，但我那样用的是别贱，的看到我有那些的看的，的铺了看的是偏给的，态度看的偏给的是，那竞争给他呢，因为他就这我的嘛都。 미참에 디치기도 마치기도 칸이 말라네 미참에 가르치기도 내 수수 다가랑 제트나 된다고 데려왔다 미참에 치기도 가르치기 그래서 디 상당 거에 차이도 디
为什么要问这些问题呢？的原因是因为，
So, with regard to myself, so in my case, I've actually studied the scriptures quite well. To some degree, I was able to really study the scriptures well. But in general, when I do something, when I engage in any kind of religious practice or dharma practice, I do look around and I'm very much influenced by what everyone else is doing around me. So that's the type of blind faith. Really, what I should be doing is doing such activity, whatever dharmic activity it may be, I should apply quotations and reasoning. So I should apply the scriptures and reasoning in order to then see whatever I'm doing. Is it for short-term benefit? Is there a long-term benefit? What is the exact benefit? And so forth. So whether I say it or I don't say it, but just following from what others do, I'm not really actually engaging in that kind of practice of investigating. I just follow and do exactly the same that everyone else does. So we really need to ask ourselves, is that what we're doing?
但我那些呢，对这些呢，你说是甚至有个呢，结果做第二次了，本地的出来些，第前呢，他偏到用的，他第前呢，就是修高度了的。
So in actuality, we should hear everyone's opinion on this. What do you think is dharma, etc. But of course, too much time, we would spend too much time and we don't have that much time, so we're not able to do and have to do what.
因为他三节给根据那的送来的，三节上给我们把那个公布的这个的是龙天北大公布留住经常的结吧，跑到面经常的结吧，这个你兄弟做的大为呢，安尼。 타버도 다 치수 별을 차샤나 다 바기 집어래 신의 수지 뒤주나 신친의 산지 마음바나 타버도 제일 무치 롱된디나나 상기 제버체버 줄세에 미세요 신다도 존나다 배나 공부를 두이나 다 유담에 비춰지 봤어 아니 세야라보다 아니 된지 장되는 게 되면 뭐지게 됐으면 포토면 문제는 계속 열어 재미제 유나는 제일 무치 롱된어디 주진 재미양다 아니 마호님이 뒤수니 괜히 집이 수기니 아니 상기 제버체버 줄스 상기 제버 나신 지그래 대체 근신 랍가와스 간데노 카와치노 요바이스 아니 요 페사디 베르체 아니 권배 민 간덴체 다디 기루베 야주샤를 라야kin 요마로 기루 제일 마지막 회고네 준비자 유별을 줄니 빠르게니 그들로 자탐고 조사죠 이디로 so 어디로 소비 다 문딩이 유에도 다 된디래 다 간들이 체면 다 건주기 흉도 장등인지 있나 아니 슈접서 저디 아니 장인지 전주 있음 아니 다음에도 비시라 다 디니는 봐 되게 쿵두서 자르게 주제단 집에 토네 아니 다랑은 존재 제고에 송요다 대디제도 점리제 전주심세에 대해 야 다하세 가시기다 지단 심제든지 동에는 저와 주지세야 저다 민 강에 체딩이 돈은 인지에서 딘디점지를 하니 점리지 저와 딘디 많이 맞지 저마다 인지 전주심수비 자침시 저에라 띵사고 딘디기 점리지 전주심체 다 디강라 제일 무치기 여기 미세기 민다제 아니 디니가기 먼저라 예중진 아니 람지 조 넘버 숨센다 하게 제일 무치기다 민다제 디지도 전에다 디게들이 이치 진행지 있나다 쇼께서 저어디 니중 청생 양답이다 또 다음에 있다와 디인버디다 디 차루와라
So we come up to, therefore here when we talk about the Buddha himself, so when we talk about his words, what we find in the speech of the Buddha himself, we find that, for example, there are these prophecies with regard to Nagarjuna and Asanga, so who are like seen as the second Buddha, who were the pioneers from the point of view of the different tenet systems, and so this is what we should study, their kind of assertions we should study. So in Tibet, they were also, their teachings have been seen have been regarded as the kind of guidelines for what is being practiced, for what is being for what is seen as the actual dharma to be meditated on, etc. So here there were these prophecies with regard to Nagarjuna, for example, as like what exists, what does not exist, with regard to existence and non-existence, interpretative and definitive teachings. So from the point of view of those different teachings, those were the pioneers, Nagarjuna and Sangha, and there were prophecies given by the Buddha about their arrival, but not just about them, also Lama Tsongkhapa. There's a I don't know how to translate right now, never mind. It's a text that is part of the Indian scriptures that existed in Tibet even before the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa. So in this text, here in this particular text, there's a prophecy which is a prophecy with regard to Lama Tsongkhapa. So there's going to be a monk who will be, his monastery will be Ganon Monastery, and he will be born in the land of snow mountains, etc. So this is not something that was made up. We could just say this was made up, but this is actually in the scriptures, in the scripture which talks about, which makes that prophecy existed even before the arrival of Lama Tsongkhapa. So therefore, someone who's studying, so what is put forth by these pioneers, so including Nagarjuna, Asanga, and then Lama Tsongkhapa, what they talk about in particular is love, compassion, and even greater than that, bodhicitta on one hand, and then the wisdom realizing on the other. So in terms of Dharma practice, what we should practice, what we need to engage in is the practice of love, compassion, bodhicitta, as well as the view of emptiness, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So, I mean, some say, yes, when they see someone suffer, when they see someone having a problem, oh, the poor thing, you know, and then they express ninja, they say, like, from their mouth, like, oh, this poor being. But this is just very superficial. Here, the practice of love and compassion is something very vast and very deep. So any of these practices should be done with sincerity. They should become vast and very deep. And as Lama Tsongkhapa says, those two practices need to be preceded by the mind of definite emergence, in other words, renunciation. So here, those three, renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom realizing emptiness, Lama Tsongkhapa calls them the three principal aspects of the practice. So a person who is faith, a person who is devoted to the teaching should practice those three. They should practice the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and the view right.
放在哪里呢？就是致力于让自己的心绪升起出离心、菩提心以及正空慧这三种两道。
다 디게들라 파게 고란지디라 지금 제일 무시기다 남지조 넘버 20 신의 송대에들라 디게디기 아니 체도 간데스 팽기레 풀라 간데 팽기레 디 메나 신다 조서 뒤에 디 메비 톤에 동행되는 트레이 뒤에 디 메비 톤에 상기에 뒤에 다 여바이나 간데스 팽도 그래 세디 김제 통과지 중보이나 갈리 신주진이 니무 진이도 용모 말대 딜레 규제 통과지 중거 있나 아니 벽이 슈제에 다가는 제거와 다 딩에 반이 버지 마주나 칸에 지시 잡아이네 슈제 없어도 신다지를 잡되기로 하다
那对于宗大师所提出来这个出离心、菩提心跟正空慧，
So with regard to the three principal aspects of the path, so Lama Tsongkhapa talking about the three principal aspects of the path, introducing them, well, we should investigate here what is the short-term benefit of practicing these three principles. What is the long-term benefit of practicing those? What is the disadvantage when we do not practice those? So is there any way in which we can practice the Buddha Dharma without engaging in the practice of those three, renunciation and so forth? Is it possible to attain liberation or Buddhahood without practicing those three? And the other question is, how do they benefit? How are they beneficial for one's practice? So one needs to investigate this, analyze this, contemplate on how they are beneficial and so forth, and not just for one day, but for many days. And without attaining or achieving certainty with regard to these points, even when one explains those three principles, one doesn't actually explain them correctly. One is not able to present them in a correct way.
다 디나네 다 다면 기체디체 다음에 발레디레 다 부칙직이네 아니 백에는 세기다 고할래요도 차라면 무시부지 차주도 있잖아요 아니 겨가기 두대원의 제바이나 지라마와도 도대바다 센전바 온다 오마란 유바 다 디게디 송대기 다네 디지디 아니 주다 오마기 셰샤에기 가사기 다면 점기 안 특히미도 슬라네다 준주다 바덴다 와타베기 다 주바람 데르와 주바람제다 뒤주는 리베이파 대성기 용방 타고 톱토구미도 내가 집해봐마도 아니 동해 댄스도 지토구미도 쓴다 리베트로네 디 차대요다.
So here in particular with regard to those three principal aspects, here in particular we're talking about the view of selflessness. And then selflessness has different levels, there are different levels of coarseness and subtlety when it comes to selflessness. And that's even from India, even from the Indian kind of scriptures, we have the division into the different tenet systems, the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and then the Madhyamika and the Vedika. So from the point of view of the Vaibhashika all the way to the Sautrantika,